We arrived at our Airbnb in West Yellowstone on June 6, 2023. This trip was supposed to be equal parts overlanding and resort-style accommodations. However, the weather didn't work in our favor, so we opted to skip the overlanding portion. Our first stop in any national park is the visitor center to stamp our passport and get current information from the rangers. This was my first trip to Yellowstone National Park, so naturally, we stopped at the usual iconic locations. However, I wanted to focus most of our time at places off the beaten path.
What we now know as Yellowstone was a pretty difficult place to explore for the first pioneering non-native settlers. Keep in mind that explorers and settlers weren't actually looking for the most difficult routes they could find or to check out the most inhospitable new areas as their number one priority. It's understandable that mostly they were looking for the quickest and easiest route, or in the case of settlers, places that were fertile and offered relatively easy living conditions to try and establish themselves, and climbing over mountains unnecessarily was not part of the plan. America's Wild West had huge areas of uncharted territory, and Yellowstone was an empty area on the map thanks to formidable mountain ranges on three sides. But the time did come when expeditions were organized to investigate the stories of magnificent high plateau, with a deep canyon and places where it was said that smoke rose from the rivers. When the first organized expeditions were able to make it into Yellowstone, they were awestruck and inspired by what they saw. The participants from the first successful expedition immediately lobbied Washington, D.C. to preserve and protect these lands. In 1872, Congress agreed, and Yellowstone became the world's first national park, with the idea of protecting it for the enjoyment of all people. Those forward-thinking politicians of the day believed that future generations, like us, should also be able to experience this place as naturally wild as possible. The combination of geothermal features, stunning mountains and waterfalls, and an amazing array of wildlife is like nowhere else on the planet. Yellowstone never fails to impress. Let's just take a moment to put ourselves in the shoes of some of the very first white people to see this incredibly unusual area. Of course, we have evidence going back as far as 11,000 years, which was roughly when the last ice age finished, of indigenous Indians inhabiting these areas as well as the rest of the North American continent. But I'm going to skip forward to white and European history. French fur trappers were believed to be the very first Europeans to venture this way in the late 1700s, but their travels are undocumented. Keep in mind that Yellowstone sits on a high plateau of 7,000 to 8,000 feet and is surrounded by huge mountain ranges on three sides. Not exactly easy to get to. The first known white explorer to venture Yellowstone's way was John Colter, who was a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. In 1805, the main expedition was told about the area, but they chose not to divert this way to investigate. But a year later, John Colter left the expedition and is known to have visited the Yellowstone area and was believed to have seen at least one geothermal feature. Sounds kind of unlikely he actually made it to this corner of the park. He did have a tough time in his travels after leaving the Lewis and Clark expedition and was nearly killed by Indians in altercations. So many people dismissed his description of a place of fire and brimstone as him having become a little delusional or a touch crazy. And for the next 50 years, other accounts by mountain men of steaming rivers and boiling mud pots were not taken seriously either and put down to myth and exaggeration. There was a serious attempt to survey the region in 1859, but they were stopped by heavy snow late in the spring and were unable to cross the Continental Divide from their approach. Subsequently, the first organized expedition did not make it here. The Civil War stopped exploration activities until the late 1860s when a privately funded group called the Cook-Folsom-Peterson Expedition gave it a try. They mainly explored around the Yellowstone River and lake area, but their reports motivated a new expedition by Washburn, Langford, and Doane in 1870. And it was that party that was able to spend a month discovering and identifying many of the features we see today. Just imagine seeing these places for the first time, not knowing what to expect or having the assistance of a guide like we do today. The experience of Washburn, Langford, and Doane directly led to the idea of protecting the Yellowstone area as a national park. Since we've been in the park, we've probably already seen the boundary markers of Yellowstone's caldera. First of all, what is a caldera? The most well-known and dramatic type of volcano is the classic cone-shaped mountain that blows its lid off. The other type of volcano, and what happened here, is when a huge amount of magma gets close to the surface rather than exploding out. The ground on top of it collapses, sinking into the magma chamber. What remains is a giant caldera. It's a crater shape that remains after the center sinks away. Yellowstone's caldera is 960 square miles in size. So, in other words, really big. The magma chamber below Yellowstone is believed to be 50 miles long by 25 miles wide and 5 miles deep. Now that is huge, too. And of course, that's the heat source for the geysers and geothermal features that we're enjoying visiting today. Yellowstone has already had 3 super eruptions. The oldest happened 2.1 million years ago and was the most formative event to create Yellowstone as we know it. And since then, there have been 2 more super eruptions. One was 1.3 million years ago, and the last one was 640,000 years ago. With only 3 events, it's difficult to say that there's a definite pattern, but it seems like super eruptions happen every 600,000 to 700,000 years. And I did say that the last one was 640,000 years ago. So, just maybe we might be due, give or take 50,000 years. And that's what makes some people nervous, that another supervolcano could happen at any time. to Laharte Rapids. There's a boardwalk here to view the rapids, but because of its popularity, it has gone through periods of being open and closed. It is a nice location if you'd like to stop. What I want to tell you about is that Laharte Rapids marks the location where some geologists believe the next big eruption of Yellowstone's volcano is possibly going to occur. How do they know this? Well, firstly, the rapids pass over an underground fault line. Over a period of 50 years, measurements of this area have shown it has risen about 3 feet and subsided a little again. That might be indicative that there's magma movement underneath.
Oh, is it?
It's delicious.
It's better than dinner in the restaurant.
I agree.
And cheaper.
All right, it's time to talk about volcanoes. Now, I want to say right off the top that I'm not telling you this stuff to try and scare anyone or make us feel paranoid about being here in Yellowstone. In geological time, activity and events here are fairly fresh, and in our travels so far, we've seen evidence that there's something very hot underneath us. But in our terms of our lifetime, or even if we expand our lifetime to human history, Yellowstone is relatively stable. It is extremely unlikely that we would see any type of cataclysmic event during our visit to the park. There's no sign of any of the expected warning signals to change that would be significant enough to make us feel so nervous that we should turn off at the next exit from the park and drive away as fast as we can. So, as I explain what's going on under us, enjoy the science and have a healthy appreciation of what nature is all about. To understand the uniqueness of what's going on under the ground here in Yellowstone, we need to talk a little about plate tectonics. Most of us remember from our school days that the Earth has a crust, and the crust layer has cracks in it, forming sometimes giant plates of rock. These are called tectonic plates, and these plates actually move across the surface of the planet. Now, of course, the rate of movement is very slow, even a little slower than the speed our fingernails grow. Some of the plates we're most familiar with are the Pacific Plate, and the plate that holds the bulk of the North American continent. The Pacific Plate is moving away from the North American Plate towards Japan. Around the edges, this movement causes earthquakes in places like Japan, New Zealand, Chile, and along the west coast of the USA. It's more normal to see volcanic activity around the edges of these plates too. In very slow motion, as one plate crashes into or pulls away from another plate, it opens cracks in the earth. These cracks can open up pathways for magma to reach the surface. Think of Mount St. Helens as a recent example. So, that's our first concept to remember. The tectonic plates on the earth are moving, albeit extremely slow. Yellowstone is not at the edge of the North American Plate. In fact, it's a long way away from the edge. So, why do we have volcanic activity here? Yellowstone is unusual in that it sits on top of what's called a hot spot, or a mantle plume. What that means is that there's a weakening or thin part of the crust here. Underneath, there's a massive reservoir of hot molten magma that's closer to the surface than normal. Every now and then, the magma finds new cracks or roots to get to the surface, and we have a volcano. Now remember how we talked about how the North American tectonic plate is moving? Well, the plate moves over the top of this hot spot. The hot spot doesn't move. But as the plate moves over top of it, from time to time it finds new openings or weak spots in the crust it can break through. Geologists have shown that there's a series of places where volcanic activity has happened previously from Yellowstone's hotspot. The oldest known place where there was volcanic activity from the Yellowstone hotspot was near the Nevada-Oregon border. So if we draw a line from the youngest location, here in Yellowstone, to the oldest, that line shows us the direction the plate is moving over the hotspot, which is towards the southwest. That means that a future volcanic event, and I mean many millions of years from now, could happen close to Billings, Montana. But I wouldn't pack up and leave anytime soon.
I see people, yeah. People are easy to recognize. They walk on two legs. Are you going up to the hilltop?
We're just gonna go to the hilltop and then come back, right?
Well,
That's what you said.
depending on what's on the other side.
More hills.
What if it's something like really cool we can't live without?
We can live without it.
Alright, I'm gonna let Sam take over talking.
Has anybody been to Yellowstone before?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes? So if you've been to Yellowstone, tell me what your favorite thing was. And if you haven't, can you tell me what you're looking forward to see? So my name's Sam again, I'm from Ohio. This is my 3rd year in Yellowstone. These lovely little tarps, if it starts pouring down rain worse than it is now, we can roll them down. The little rule we like to have is the whole wagon needs to agree on it if you want those rolled down. So do you guys want these rolled down or do you want them left up? Everybody says leave them up. Do you guys know what year that was? Or just... Okay, I'll ask. That's super interesting because I didn't know about that. So we are almost to cookout, y'all. If you guys look straight ahead of me, there is going to be a corral full of horses. That corral is off limits to you guys. Their butts are facing out. Trust me, nothing comes good from the back end of a horse.
You know what cowboy coffee is, right? They don't have a filter, they just put the grounds in hot water, boil it, and release it.
I should have been a cowboy. I should have learned to rope and ride. Wearing my 6-shooter, riding my pony on a cattle drive. Stealing the young girls' hearts.
My favorite horse, his name is Hightower. And he's a red.
As sure as night is dark and day is light, I keep you on my mind both day and night. And happiness I felt proves that it's right. Because you're mine, I walk the line. I got a jingle in my jeans, sore places in between. I'm leaving old Salt Lake with a push and a pull. Happy trail.